Good evening, this is Brown at Eye of Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Hero, Warrior of the Mystic Realms. So, Hero was a 6-issue miniseries that was put out by Marvel Comics in 1990, going way back to when I was a little kid. And I found this miniseries over at Half Price Books, probably about 2 years ago, and I just recently got around to reading it. And gotta say, it was actually a pretty fun little ride. And before I get into it, I'll show you all the cover art real quick. Issue 1. Issue 2. Issue 3. Issue 4. Issue 5. Love that shot of the dragon, especially from the back perspective. And last but not least, issue 6. So, Hero was written by a gentleman named David Michelinie, who, amongst other things, co-created the characters of Venom and Scott Lang, aka Ant-Man, who most people will probably recognize that character because he was played by Paul Rudd in the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and also Michelinie was also the writer who had a rather extensive run on the series Iron Man, and amongst other things on that book, gave us the classic storyline, the Armor Wars. So if you're wanting to check out a good Iron Man story, or just want to look up something about the character, check out that story, Armor Wars. You won't regret it. I've read it. Good story. Anyway, though, the artist is a guy named Steve Purcell, who had worked primarily as a freelance artist for some time, but he found kind of a bit of fame as the creator artist on a series called Sam and Max. And I haven't had the pleasure of reading that particular series, but by all accounts, it's a good one. And he also, as of late, seems to be working with Pixar, of all people, in many departments. He's worked on the films like Cars, Brave, so pretty wild. Going from one end to the other. Illustrating comic books and then working with animation, and so the idea of these two doing a collaboration, so far back, it's pretty cool. So the basic story is the main character is a security courier named Cody Pace, and he lives in New Jersey, and he's the kind of guy who he'll be saying one thing, doing another, and 1 minute his girlfriend loves him, next minute she hates him because he keeps scheduling their date, but then scheduling one of his courier assignments on the exact same day. And it's kind of an approach that has dogged him throughout his life. You kind of get the idea of it, but basically he's all surface level, but beneath that his life is kind of contradictory, saying one thing, doing another. And one day he gets a courier assignment to deliver a package to a diplomatic assembly. And as it happens, this particular package, which is handcuffed to him at the wrist, once it goes through customs, it's discovered that, well, there's a bomb in the package. And unfortunately, no one has the key to, unlatch the handcuffs from him, or at the very least, the key that was given to him doesn't work. And so, well, Cody dies. The explosion, boom, he's gone. Except that's just the beginning of the story, because next thing he knows, he finds himself in a whole other world entirely, with rather bizarre attire, and in this landscape, which you know looks like something from maybe a storybook or something, and except, well, it's quite real. And he finds himself falling in with a rather motley crew of characters. And it turns out that he's being hunted by a rather unpleasant individual named Malev- Malevolos. I hope I'm saying that name right. I had to write some of this stuff down. But Malevolos is, a rather unpleasant individual who, has this, well, lifelong dream of bringing death to the entire universe. Kind of been there, done that as far as end all be all villain goals go, except for the fact that when he attempted to do so in this one particular time, there was some sort of dimensional interference, and what ended up happening was the minute Cody got blown up, his essence or spirit, as it were, happened to cross paths with the destructive energy that Malevolos was working with, and as a result, Cody had found himself in this on this alien world, and with this bizarre group of characters that he falls in with along the way. And it also happens that he happens to have in the process gotten a hold of Malevolos's weapon, his of choice, called the Devil Thorn, and without it, Malevolos can't fully commit to erasing all life throughout the universe for the ultimate death high. But as it happens, because of this cross-dimensional interference, Cody happens to be the only one who can properly wield it, even though he's never used it in his life. But that's cross-dimensional interference for you. And so he happens to find that he can die because he gets into quite a few fights with various henchmen throughout this world. But every time he dies, and he happens to be at a spot where dimensions just happen to intersect, he finds himself resurrected on another world entirely. Different landscape, different culture, and his friends. They're having to kind of keep up with him. Find some way to get from one world, one dimension to another. And so as it happens, this results in Malevolos realizing that if he can just get Cody in his hands, he can not only wipe out all life in his universe, but in other universes as well. And that's multiple realities for you. But yeah, so this is it's really a fun. It was a fascinating premise, really, because you have multiple dimensions, alternate realities, and you have this character, this Cody, who is not a hero by any means, but he's put in a situation where he's having to defend himself and fight for his life, and even though he falls in with some characters who are decidedly a lot more heroic than he is, I mean, he himself is just fighting to get back to his own planet, or his own home of New Jersey, and he could care less about the bigger picture here. Whereas the comrades he finds himself saddled with, they're the ones who are actually fighting to preserve life in the universe, or at least in this dimension that they're in initially. And that's kind of one of the things that um, I found, it was sort of a pro and a con in a way, because, the characters in this book, I found were kind of a mixed bag, because the character of Cody, he doesn't really seem to grow as a character, um, at least until the very last issue of the miniseries. Because when you first got him, I mean, yeah, I mean, he's, like I said, saying one thing, doing another, and then he dies, and well, I mean, yeah, he takes a bit of time to try and get his bearings in this, new realm, but at the same time, he just keeps on, bitching and moaning about wanting to get back home, and like I said, he could care less about the bigger picture, and about all life in the universe being wiped out, just as long as you know he's back home in time for where it was he was planning on doing before he got blown up. And so it starts to grate after a while, because he kind of comes across as a character who was maybe meant. Um, it kind of made me think of like a bad sitcom character, in the sense that you have someone who says something that, I mean, is maybe moderately amusing at best, but then suddenly the laugh track comes in, and there's like an overcompensation of laughter. It seems like, I mean, that's the kind of feeling I got with his character, because he's always got these you know I guess puns, or bizarre time jokes, and yeah, he just, as a character, I mean he looked cool and everything, especially with his new attire, and when he's fighting the enemies, but at the same time he just didn't really do it for me as a character up until the very last issue, in which he starts to realize that yeah, he theoretically could go home, but in doing so, he would be helping Malevolos to wipe out life throughout the entire universe. And once he actually catches a glimpse of that, as in just a couple of planets full of alien civilizations being wiped out, that's when he realizes that hey, there's more to this picture than him getting home to New Jersey. And so at that point, I mean, yeah, it was a nice bit of growth for his character, but unfortunately, it was at the very end of the series, or miniseries. And but on the other hand, though, I did like the characters they found himself falling in with, and you know, for this particular setting, this mishmash of science fiction and fantasy, um, considering the amount of life that's hinted at, there's this very intriguing mixture of characters here. You had Ort, who sort of is like a humanoid elf elf-like being, but he, I mean, very friendly individual, but unfortunately he is kind of cursed with the ability to turn into a dragon, which sounds really cool, and on paper, literally, because it looks cool in the book. uh, the problem is he can't control when he turns into a dragon, and when he turns back into, well, just his normal elf-like self. And there's a rather amusing backstory to that, but it also results in some amusing moments. Like one minute he'll be fighting bad guys as his dragon, or he'll be carrying one of the characters on his back, but then suddenly he'll turn back to his childlike elf self, and next thing you know, well, uh, whoever's on his back is way too heavy. Boom, little stuff like that. So I like the little humorous touch with that. There's also the character of Ivory, who she kind of made me think of an Amazonian warrior, and I mean, I think she was supposed to be sort of like Xena warrior princess, but before Xena warrior princess. And I liked her because she provided like a strong lead, as opposed to the character of Cody, who was just fighting simply just because he had to fight. In a sense that someone's trying to take his head off, he's obviously going to defend himself. But Ivory, though, she actually had a cause to fight for, and she's the one who is most clearly aligned on the side of right, in the sense that she has a mission to preserve life, and so when you kind of compare the two together, Ivory initially comes across as a lot more endearing, simply because she's fighting for a just cause. And also, there was another character who was rather unique. His name was Jabot Wafloon. I hope I'm saying his name right. But he kind of looks like, imagine, I guess you could say, a more benevolent version of Jabba the Hutt, except instead of Jabba's face, it's like literally a pig face. And he's carried along because he's so heavy, he's carried along on this little stretcher by these little lizard creatures. And it's really nice touch, because it's like every time you see this thing moving from panel to panel, you see his little lizard creatures carrying him, and their legs scurrying and all that, and very, very good visual detail. But he also happens to have this really neat ability to take his eyes out and have them walk along to hard to reach areas. Like, say if they're needing to check corners at an enemy's palace or something like that, he can take out one of his eyes and it literally just crawls along, and he can while he's covering where his eye hole is, he can literally see what this ambulatory eye sees. And so I thought that was actually pretty cool, and not exactly an ability you expected to see in a character like that. But he also happens to have kind of a appetite for flowers. Like, he literally eats flowers. And so just little random stuff like that I thought was pretty cool. And he also happens to be a genuinely likable character. Always trying to keep motivation going for the team. And last but not least, there was a guy named Galen Peacemaker. And the funny thing about him is, the last name makes it sound like he's a police officer of some sort, but no, he's called Peacemaker because he has a bag that literally has pieces of his enemies in them. So yeah, little on the gruesome side, at least as far as that little backstory there. But thankfully, you don't see anything in that regard. But it's just one of those moments. That's Peacemaker. Okay, got it. But a little interesting thing about him is that as far as power goes, next to Cody, he's probably the most powerful member of the team. The problem is the weapon he has is this it's a bow and arrow set, and the problem is any time he uses one of the arrows, it brings him closer to death. And so while these arrows kind of just wipe the floor with the enemies, like you visually see him, kind of, decreasing in stature and, becoming a little more ghoul-like, or at least thinner. So I thought that was kind of a nice touch. And so while the story itself, in a sense of, them trying to, take on, an enemy who, has kind of a fetish for ending all life in the universe, just because, that story might be a little, cliche. It's the fact that these characters each have these little quirks, that kind of make the ride just a little more interesting. And on the occasions that they find themselves in other realities or other worlds, the creative team definitely has a good time, showing, the reader, this, side of life that, hadn't been seen before. The only thing about that is, I did like how, the idea of the main character dying and being reborn, like on a different world, multiple times. I mean, it sort of opens itself up to all sorts of possibilities. I mean, this could have been like a, bizarre version of, I don't know, Quantum Leap or something like that, or maybe Resurrection Man. But I mean, those are two different things, I know. But and so I mean, you see just kind of a glimpse of that, because most of the story, focuses on the world that Cody initially found himself in when he first died. I mean, it's a fascinating world, to be sure, but I think if I remember correctly, he only you only see him dying once or twice, and he's on one or two more worlds. But what we see of those worlds is fascinating, and we get snippets of backstories on these worlds. But I kind of found myself wishing that this miniseries had, I'm not going to say gone on as an ongoing series, but maybe as kind of a 12 issue maxi series, because that way they could have built further upon the lore that's just hinted at in this mini series, because you do get glimpses of life on other worlds or other dimensions, and it's fascinating to think about, but you just get a glimpse and that's it. And so it just, to me at least, it came across as a tad rushed. I mean, it was still fun, but I just found myself wondering what life on these other worlds were like, because you only see something to that extent for one or two other worlds besides the one that Cody initially found himself on. And yeah, and also I did like how there were other forces at work in this storyline, and like, I guess you could say a more benevolent force to oppose the evil, if you will. And like, there were a group of almost like gods, but I guess technically you'd call them aliens. But they were the ones who were sort of pulling the strings. Like, they're the ones who were casting out and trying to find a champion for their cause, and they just happened to get Cody, of all people, who is definitely not a champion and is not even a hero when you get right down to it. He's just a guy who's confused and PO'd that he's not in New Jersey anymore, and his soon-to-be ex-girlfriend's probably going to kill him when he gets back home because he forgot their date, that kind of thing. But he's the only one they could find, and so it is kind of amusing seeing their mumblings and groanings, like, is he seriously the best we could come up with? But they're actually working with his newfound comrades, and like, they're the ones who they're sort of trying to guide him along. But once Cody kind of gets the big picture, he reluctantly starts to work with his comrades, with, I guess, a little more communication this time around, because even as stubborn as he is, when a godlike being's literally telling him, hey, this is what's going on, okay, he doesn't have to be a hero, but he can at least accept what's going on. And so but like I said earlier, his character himself, though, I didn't really find myself endeared to him, simply because he came across as someone who was written like less than stellar sitcom character. And it wasn't until the very last issue where he actually began to, well, take on the role of a hero. And I will say that I liked the development in that sense. When you get to that point, you kind of understand why. I think I would say that. But it's just, I wish that maybe this kind of goes back to me wishing that this miniseries had been like a 12-issue maxi series, because then I think maybe there had been a little more development and have him grow as a character and get from point A to point B, and he becomes the hero that the title of the book is. And I don't want to spoil the ending, but I will say that there is a touch of irony in there that I really appreciated, and it just involves, I guess you could say, a character, putting their lives on the line, for one last time, and as a result, only a few people remember them, but outside of them, no one else does. And so I did find that kind of a nice little touch, for the ending, because I mean, I don't want to spoil everything, but I mean, I'm just thinking that little explanation there might be as close of a bit I could get to. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, I did like how the book was initially kind of fun and games, but then once it got to that last issue, that's when it got real, and it was at that point where when the ironic ending came into play, that's where it felt like something that had some substance to it, as opposed to just a fun Saturday morning cartoon ride. But yeah, it was fun for what it was, and I would say on a 5-star scale, I'll give Hero 3 out of 5 stars. It was decent. I mean, nothing great, but for what it was, it was a fun ride, and I liked the, glimpse of, other worlds that this, story gave us. I wish we could have seen more, but as it is, we got what we got. So thank you for taking the time to check out this review, and you got any questions, comments, drop a line, let me know. Y'all have a good night.